Douglas, you wrote a superb piece for the New York Post on the unscientific bullies of the trans movement and how they were allowed to push their often warped ideology with little pushback from the medical fraternity until recently. And one of the most shameful tactics was to terrify parents, to manipulate parents into backing so-called gender-affirming care for their child with lines like, "Would you rather have a trans daughter or a dead son?"
Yeah, I mean, what the column was bouncing off a very interesting piece that there was this DHSS investigation into this, a scholarly and learned paper by American scientists and others looking into whether so-called gender-affirming care or the giving of cross-sex hormones and the use of double mastectomies on minors, whether this was all such a great idea after all. And the review in question looked at all of the reviews that have been happening, not least the CAS review in the UK, and studies in Scandinavia and all the places you're meant to listen to studies from, showing that all of these countries have understandably been stepping back from the brink of what we were going into in recent years so merrily and unquestioned. And what was striking about it was that the authors of this report in America wanted to remain anonymous. And one of them was outed online. People as trans activist extremists outed this person online. And he wrote to try to sort of justify the findings of the report. But what is striking to me is look at the fact that even in the United States of America in this era, medical professionals and others want to hide their names if they are saying things that are widely accepted now in other countries, such as there is no evidence that giving children cross-sex hormones at an age where they cannot vote, cannot drive a car, cannot buy alcohol, mightn't that be that great an idea, or at least should deserve more questioning. I think it's an example of the fact, we often talk about the terrorizing effects of mobs and so on, but this is how a a sort of fringe part of the trans lobby can actually insinuate its way into the mainstream by trying to terrorize, terrify, and silence actual experts on these questions. It's really shameful, and I'm glad that some people have been finding their voice.
Well, I wish they'd find their voice in this country because we don't even have a review. We are so backward in this area. We've seen the UK, Scandinavia, the US start looking at the evidence behind this entire dogma, I call it. I mean, this gender-affirming care. But in this country, they're too terrified to even review the practices. Now, Douglas, before you go, you've done it now. You've gone and penned a piece about toxic femininity for The Spectator. We've heard plenty about toxic masculinity, but it really isn't. It's almost taboo to be critical of femininity. In fact, we're told the world's problems would probably be solved if we were all just a bit more compassionate and had a bit more empathy and had a bit more feminine traits. Do you disagree?
Yes, I very much disagree. I mean, if you take the view, as it seems our societies have decided to take, that masculinity has toxic traits. Now, this is itself debatable. But if you say there are certain toxic traits in masculinity, things that men should be wary of doing in the public sphere, manners of behavior and so on, it's always presented as if the answer to everything is feminine. But of course, if you do take this line of argument, then it should be recognized that there are certain things pushed as feminine traits in our society, which themselves can be deeply, deeply toxic. And the most interesting one is the one you just mentioned there, is, for instance, the presumption, and whether it's Jacinda Ardern or whether it's Angela Rayner in the UK, there's this Kamala Harris, for that matter. There is this presumption that if we just had more empathy, everything would be better. And they present empathy as a particularly feminine trait, which is itself is sort of wildly sexist. But let's pass over that for a moment. But what's interesting about it is, and I give the example of two things that happened in the UK within a week: the decision to decriminalize abortions after 6 months, which means child in the womb with a viable chance of surviving outside of the womb can be killed. And this was presented to Parliament as a case of having more empathy for the mothers who find themselves at 8 months wanting to abort their child, and more. And then at the same week, another female Labour MP presented the bill for assisted dying, otherwise known as euthanasia, or choose the date on which you want to die, and the state will help you. This argument, too, was presented solely on terms of empathy, compassion, and understanding. There was almost no analysis or a serious rigor about whether elderly men and women mightn't feel pressured by not being a burden on their families, or not being a burden on the sacred welfare state, and much more. That was all pushed aside, and the bill was voted through. As with the issue of post 6 months abortions, all in the language of empathy, understanding, and much more. But just consider that in these two cases, life in the UK was truncated at both ends in those days by Parliament, and parliamentarians always presenting themselves as filled with compassion. If we are going to live in a society where we want to be alive to toxic traits, we should be alive to them from whichever direction they come from. So I don't doubt that some people will be triggered by that, but reality, as we know, is often triggering.
Reality can be triggering, and I'm expecting just a wave of outrage on X and other social media platforms coming your way. Douglas Murray, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Great pleasure as always, Rita.